Right. Hello. Hello. So, hopefully I will keep this video short, but I just wanted to quickly cover this project that I spent quite a lot of time and energy doing for about a year or 2 years there. And so through that time, I made this tablet, and it was quite the adventure. So, enjoy. Okay, so this all started at the end of 2020. I know, no one really wants to think about that year, but that's where this story begins. Because I just come off this great big project that had had me working in a workshop environment a whole bunch, and that meant sooner rather than later, my hands were getting covered in some grody, disgusting, gluey, sticky substance. And then I'd be trying to use my wonderful, sleek, aluminum laptop with these disgusting fingers, and I would wind up typing in my password with my knuckles because I didn't want to get the keyboard all dirty from my disgusting hands, and it just wasn't very pleasant. And then along with that, I sometimes had to plug my laptop into an Arduino away from a desk, and so I would be cradling my laptop in one arm, and all I had was this sort of USB hub to try and like plug USB-A cable in. And it's just dangling off the side, and so I'd be trying to plug in a cable one-handed with this into this thing, and it was just so annoying. And so the original idea for this tablet project was, okay, it's just going to be a cheap plastic tablet that can just live in a workshop, and I won't care if I get it dirty or dented or whatever, and it'll have USB-A, so I can just easily plug in a USB-A cable. But then overall, I've had this idea for a maker-focused computer. Because you have gaming laptops and you have workstations and you have these computers that are marketed towards like photo and video editing. And it's like, okay, what if you made a maker-focused tablet, and what would that look like? And so of course you gotta have an Arduino, you gotta have a built-in Arduino, and you have to have built-in sensors, and then even like quick connectors, so you can connect up more sensors really easily and quickly, and you really want to quickly test something. And then of course, best of all, it's gotta have buttons and switches. It can't just be some boring plain touchscreen tablet. It's gotta have these wonderful fun buttons and switches that you can play with and fiddle with and program to do different tasks and all this stuff. And then along with that, you have to have these extra LEDs that like extra sort of LED indicators and whatnot. And it's just got to be, overall, it just needs to be just fun and colorful and creative and inspire you to create. And so this idea for this maker tablet, I decided to sort of go for that and try and make that a reality with this tablet project. And another thing with this maker tablet, it's got to be like sort of a hub for any project. Of course, it's got to be like the go-to item, the ultimate thing that you could use for anything. And so that those ideas were what I tried to make into reality with this project. Okay, let me talk you through what I've done. So, its beating heart is a Raspberry Pi 3B, and it's backed up by an Itsy Bitsy M0, and of course it's got a nice big 10-inch touchscreen, and you might see dual microphones, as well as some sensors up top and 2 removable control bars. And then of course I added a little quick connector, so you can add on extra sensors if you want. So focusing on this top control or sensor bar, 3 different sensors. First was a gesture sensor, which it was intended to be used as a gesture sensor. I thought perhaps like even if you have like super disgusting hands and you don't want to touch the screen, you could use like a basic sort of gesture to maybe just sort of scroll up or down on a web page or something simple like that. And then of course next to that is an accelerometer and a gyro, and I thought that could sort of be used to A, rotate the screen, and B, maybe as some tilt controls. If you're trying to remotely control another project, you could use some like tablet tilt controls. And then of course I wanted to have just some basic like geeky nerdy sort of readings about the workshop, and so I added a air quality pressure humidity sensor. Now, focusing on these 2 control bars, they're removable. They're kind of like Nintendo Switch bars, and they have just all these wonderful, amazing buttons and switches and joysticks and 5-way buttons. And then, of course, one of the coolest things is this 28 RGB LED shim from Pimoroni, which was intended to be used as a sort of secondary sort of information display. Right now, it's just displaying like the CPU usage, but I thought you could display other data as well and just sort of be a secondary to whatever information is on the screen. And then of course I made a kind of that, basic user interface to show all the states of the buttons and all the sensor stuff. And so that was, but the idea was all these buttons and switches are programmable, and so you could set them up to do whatever you wanted to. And then internally, I allocated space for two transceivers. I allocated space and buttons, or GPIOs, because I wanted this to be the hub for any project, and that meant I wanted it to also be able to maybe control a remote controlled project. And so I have joysticks and whatnot, and then I wanted to add transceivers, and especially one of the transceivers I was looking at maybe adding eventually was an XB, and that would have required an external antenna. And isn't that just the coolest thing ever to have a tablet with an antenna sticking out the side? And I just it was like, that would be so cool. I didn't add them yet. I was sort of like, hey, I'll add them when I need them. Now looking at the back, first we have this nice wonderful Charlie plexed red matrix, and it's sort of where the Pimoroni shim was intended to be used as to display information and readouts and whatnot. This was intended as sort of just like a fun thing. It was like the sort of maker version of the glowing Apple logo, except of course you can make this show whatever you want. You could have a sort of waving stick figure or scrolling text for telling people to go away. And then of course it's a bunch of red LEDs, so it can double as a sort of like low light red flashlight for secret midnight builds and meetings and whatnot. And then of course next to that we have some just normal white LEDs, which is just kind of like a more powerful version of like your phone flashlight, to light up whatever space you need. Now up here is part of the keyboard, and before I talk about my keyboard solution, I want to talk a bit about the existing solutions, which like this, I don't really, it's all the twists around and all that. It's just so wobbly to have like this sort of 2-in-1 tablet laptop with like all that screen weight on that one joint, and it's so cringy. And of course you have this solution where it sort of bends over backwards, but then like you're holding the computer when it's in tablet mode by its keyboard, like maybe even like have it holding the depressed keys underneath your fingers, and that just sounds so cringy to me. And then of course very commonly you'll have like a tablet with like a magnetic sort of keyboard case. But even then, like, what if you're outside away from a place to set down the keyboard and you want to use it as a tablet? Now suddenly you have this sort of second thing you have to hold because you've like detached this keyboard. But what if it's wet out? Where do you put this? It's just this extra annoying thing to deal with. And so with all that in mind, I thought I came up with an idea that I hadn't seen before, but I don't know, maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't. But these things, which you noticed earlier, are these. They're retractable ID badge lanyard things. And I have connected them to the back of the keyboard. So, you see where I'm going with this? When the keyboard will just retract back up into this slot in the back here. And so, you can see that in this video. And so it didn't quite work perfectly, but I'd say for a first attempt, I was pretty pleased with how it was able. All you have to do is just lift it up, and the keyboard will just retract back into the slot in the back, and then it's a tablet, and the keyboard's out of the way, and you don't have to worry about it at all. Now I want to go over just some of the mistakes that happened, because this was a very big, very messy project, and there were quite a lot of mistakes, but one of the biggest was the LiPos. I'm a little bit terrified of LiPos, and I think for good reason, considering that they can blow up or catch fire or smoke or whatever. And so I was just like, hey, I'll stick to some existing solutions and just use these, phone USB battery packs. And so I got 3 of these, and it led me to having to remove the casing. And if you ever find yourself using a knife to remove a LiPo casing, especially if it's a circular LiPo like this, where it's very easy for the knife to slip, you need a better solution. This is not a good way to do things. I'm so happy and thankful that I was very lucky to not stab myself. And then of course I thought, hey, I'll just have all 3 LiPos in parallel, powering the Raspberry Pi and all the other loads, and it can just all the batteries can power all the different things. But the Raspberry Pi wasn't really too happy with this. It kept on sort of like starting to boot up, and then it would sort of lose power, and then it just like it was stuck in this endless cycle of like getting partly through booting up and then restarting. And it I'm still not really sure why, but it was obviously not working. So I had to go with this, where a single battery was for the Raspberry Pi and then the other batteries for the display. And that is kind of not the best solution, because you can wind up with the situation where you have battery power to your display, but the battery for the Raspberry Pi is dead, or vice versa. Um, and I even tried, well, even with this, there was, still giving me this warning of like low voltage, and I measured the voltage, and it's like 4.85 volts, and according to the battery, at least, it was like 2 amps of current it could supply. And so it all, I don't really understand why the Pi wasn't very happy with this. I even added at one point a Adafruit power booster, and even then it was still kind of giving me like a, hey, you're this, still showing up this warning. And so, in the end, the Raspberry Pis, you'll see later, was already pretty beat up. So it was kind of like, oh, I'll just leave it, and, it's fine, it's working. Then, of course, the batteries were all in this section down here, in here. And so it would all, like, you have two halves of the casing would all sort of slide together. And it was very satisfying to have it slide together, but it made it very hard to access the batteries. And so at one point, you can see here, these are the wires from the batteries coming into the main compartment. And at one point, they got stuck in this little hole, and it was very, very dangerously close to short circuiting, and that was just not good at all. Now, next mistake, way too heavy. I printed it in solid PLA, I think to help try and protect it. At least I think that was the idea at the time. Wouldn't do that now. And then of course with the batteries and with the screen and with all this stuff, it was properly heavy. It was just painful. Okay, now the wiring. As I said, the Pi got pretty beat up in this. I was trying to keep the tablet as thin as possible, and that meant removing all of the ports. And I just wanted to, I could have used like a or compute module or something like that, but I wanted to use the Raspberry Pi that I had on hand. But I kind of did this, very sort of badly. Like it looks like a caveman did it, and so it's, this Pi has definitely been through the ringer for sure. It gets worse though, because this is the wiring, and it's everywhere, and it's a nightmare, because for the two removable touch bars, I just decided to send every GPIO pin I needed to the touch bar. So you have like these connectors with like 20 wires going in on either side, and of course all those wires are coming from like the Pi GPIO pins and the Itsy Bitsy and all this stuff, and I would not do this like this again, no way. On the little sort of side tidbit note, look at all the LEDs. It's so cool. I mean, yeah, you're not going to see them 98% of the time, but oh my God, they're just so cool to look at. Now, before I get to the main problems, we're going to do a little honorable mention, because the keyboard a couple different keyboards I tried, and the keyboard I eventually, stuck with, I tried this keyboard. And I thought I could just move this trackpad down to the bottom, because it's too wide in this form factor to work with the tablet. And that wound up with me trying to extend the cabling for the keyboard itself so I could, move the PCB, because even like the PCB was like right here, and so even it was still sticking out too far, and it just don't do that. I eventually just had to give it up, because it was just like this isn't a way to do things. It's just Now, the two biggest problems. The first one was that I was just trying to solve too many problems at once. This tablet was trying to be a tablet and a remote control and this, different keyboard solution and have a sensor bar. And it was just, when I was coming at the beginning, it was like, oh, it all just came together so wonderfully and beautifully into this one single, prototype. But the reality is that it would make so much more sense to have it as multiple separate things. You could have like a tablet project, and then like, separately have like a remote control project, and like make this, remote control. And then that makes it sort of more modular and better to, you can use the remote control separately from this big, massive, heavy tablet. And so, I should have looked at different ways of trying to solve these problems. And like, the original problems was just like, hey, I don't want to touch the disgusting, my laptop with my disgusting fingers. And it's like, well, that's easy enough to solve. I could just have gotten a, Bluetooth keyboard and designated that the dirty keyboard, and then just like only, type been okay typing, with dirty fingers on that or whatever. And then of course my other issue was like, trying to connect to this dangling dongle, and it's like, well, there, you have USB-C to USB-A ports that, that would have been easy enough to buy, and that solves that problem right there. So I should have paused and looked at some other solutions. Now, related to that was I didn't really iterate. I just went for this final solution, and I should have this was such a big project money-wise and time-wise. I spent over 200 hours on it, I think easily over 200 hours. And I just went for that final goal. And with a project this big and with this many features and all these different little, bells and whistles, iterations aren't really optional. It's something you just have to do. If I'd iterated, I would have caught all the mistakes with the batteries and the power. I would have caught that a lot earlier on, and that wouldn't have caused me so many headaches later on. And then, of course, if I'd iterated, it would have allowed me to catch the biggest problem of them all, and that's that the Raspberry Pi was just simply too slow when it was accessing the internet to really be a viable option. And you can have all the bells and whistles that you want, all these extra little fun things, but at the end of the day, most of the time you're just using a computer to access the internet. And if you can't really do that well, then you're not going to really be using the computer. And so at the end of the day, I had this fully functional tablet with all these different features and everything, and it wasn't really usable. And so as a result, it spent the next couple of months just sitting on my desk gathering dust. And so you're probably wondering why you've just been watching me and not any video of the actual tablet itself. And that's because I didn't take too many videos of it in the past, and it doesn't exist in the present to take videos of it now, because after months of just collecting dust and me not really using it, I wound up scrapping it for parts. So because I needed a Raspberry Pi for another project. Dare I say, on that terrible disappointment, thank you so much for watching, and see you later.